With its roots in the uprising of November 1830 and encouraged by events elsewhere in Europe, including the success of the Italian independence movement, and taking advantage of a Russia weakened by the Crimean War and the reforms introduced by Tsar Alexander II, the uprising of January 1863 was the longest lasting in post-partition Poland. Although it was ultimately unsuccessful and Russian reprisals were swift and ruthless, its engagement of all levels of society went on to have a decisive influence on the subsequent development of Polish society. This is the story of that uprising.
It didn't satisfy anybody.
Exactly. That's part of it. And of course, it's probably worth pointing out is that in the background, of course, apart from this sort of romantic feeling about getting Poland back, there'd also been in other countries. In 1861, I think it was, it had Italian unification.
1861, yeah.
Yeah, 1861.
Garibaldi and his actions.
Movements in Germany, movements in Hungary were in train. So, of course, the Polish folk who thought about this would also sort of think this is a generally European, a sympathetic time to be trying to move forward in terms of liberty.
Garibaldi was very nice because when the January uprising broke out, he said, "Do not forget Poland." There
had been some Polish sort of, if you want to call it, fighters who'd been training with Garibaldi's men in Italy, ready for the...
In Italy, Francesco Nullo. That's perhaps the only Italian who has a monument in Warsaw.
Because he died in Poland.
Yes,
in
he
fact,
died
yes.
here in one of the first battles, very bravely. Francesco Nullo is a Polish-Italian hero. The same with François Rochebrune, who led a band of let's say French special forces. He also joined the uprising. So in November uprising, it's mostly Polish. January uprising is joined by many nations. I mean, once I was working on that, and you can always say that of Ukrainians, Belarusians, Lithuanians, first of all. No, but okay, you can say that these are, in a sense, these are Poles. But you've got Italians, French, Hungarians. I mean, there's a huge support. I mean, the Polish case was perhaps at that time had the best opinion, the best press of all times. I mean, during the partitions.
But that would largely because as we saw on the previous program, one of the effects of the great immigration will be there'll be a lot of people, quite prominent people, who would of course be pushing the Polish case.
We mentioned
throughout Europe. So again,
Walewski, we mentioned Branicki, we mentioned a number of people that we've mentioned.
So this would be feeding into this general feeling that the time had come for Poland to try to throw off. Well, of course, and I think it's probably worth, when I say throw off, of course, there were two schools of thought that were the sort of, as you hinted at earlier, there were sort of the whites who were more for a sort of gradual liberalization, if I can use that word, of Poland.
To suffer patiently,
but gradually. Sort of Fabian type approach. And of course the Reds...
Procrastination? No,
well, no, but I think Fabianism is all sort of gradual, not getting too excited too quickly. And of course the young guns of the Reds, who were sort of impatient, ready
young
to...
sports.
Yes, ready to actually fight. And of course you had the setting up then in 1862 this national committee. Which was a sort of an early idea, a sort of underground government, which at that stage was sort of agitating and not actually fighting as such.
No, it was mostly preparing.
Exactly.
Because the yet another difference between the January and November uprising. November uprising was a surprise for everybody. No, except the plotters.
Yes, yes.
But here it was very well prepared. I mean, it wasn't prepared to the maximum because Wielopolski counteracted in January. And
Well, I was going to say, Wielkopolski had this sort of feeling that something was afoot,
I mean, he knew very well that Poles were cooking up something.
and they were likely to go in the spring of 1863.
Exactly, and so that's why he called for a enrollment.
Conscription.
Conscription, enrollment,
12th of January, if my memory serves me correctly. 1863.
In the cities.
Yes.
In the countryside, it was the date was a bit later, and that's why, because we can ask that why the uprising broke out on 22-23.
I think he'd felt that if he sort of conscripted folk, well, young men actually.
I mean, he have very bad lists.
In winter, that would sort of put paid to any revolution, because it had a completely opposite effect, because the reaction to that was on the 22nd of January 1863. The National Committee sort of called itself, I think, announced itself as some sort of provisional government.
Provisional national government.
That's right, and we want to see the return of Poland to the 1792 borders, and off we go, and all things Russian to be... I mean, sorry, I'm summarising radically, but I mean that I think was was a sort of the final moment when the uprising broke out.
In fact, and you are very right in saying that, the 1863 uprising was the last attempt to restore Poland within its borders from before partitions.
So that's a pre-17... sorry, 1772. Sorry,
1772 before the first partition. So with huge parts of Belarus, not Belarus in total, Lithuania, Ukraine, and so on and so on. And when you look at the maps of the staff, for example, of the January uprising, I mean, you see that these guys. Okay, I was not to say that word. These people.
Well, they were. They probably. But we're safe. We're back in the 1970s. They probably all were guys, actually.
These people fought in these terms. I mean, they would draw maps of pre-partition Poland, divided into voivodeships. So the way. It was there before partitions, not into gubernie and so on and so on. So they really fought as if they were, 80, 70 years before.
And that's
exactly. Fascinating.